put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The letter that ended the world. In September 2008, a woman in Nevada received a letter that would destroy her life. The bank was taking her home. She had never missed a payment. She had done everything right. But in the fine print of her mortgage, buried beneath layers of financial jargon, was a ticking time bomb that bankers had deliberately hidden from her. And she wasn't alone. Across America, millions were about to discover they'd been sold a lie wrapped in the American dream. This is the story of the greatest financial crime in modern history, a conspiracy so vast, so systemic, that it nearly collapsed the entire global economy, and the men who orchestrated it. They walked away richer than ever. The year is 2000. Deep inside the glass towers of Wall Street, something sinister is taking shape. In boardrooms where daylight struggles to penetrate, investment bankers are discovering a new form of alchemy, a way to turn worthless debt into pure gold. They call them mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps. The names don't matter. What matters is that they've found a way to package the American dream, home ownership, and sell it as a product. Again, and again, and again. At the heart of this financial machine are 5 names that will become synonymous with corporate greed: Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. These aren't just banks. They're empires built on secrets. And in the early 2000s, they're all chasing the same prey: mortgages. But not just any mortgages. They want the risky ones, the ones that shouldn't exist, the ones that will destroy lives. Here's how the trap was set. Traditional mortgages were boring, safe, predictable, regulated. Borrowers needed good credit, stable income, a 20% down payment. But safety doesn't make billionaires. So the banks engineered something revolutionary and ruthless: subprime mortgages. Loans given to people with bad credit, no income verification, 0 down payment. Loans that seemed impossible. Loans that were designed to fail. The pitch was intoxicating. A mortgage broker in California sits across from a janitor making $30,000 a year. "You deserve your own home," he says, sliding papers across the desk. "Don't worry about the price. Don't worry about your income. We'll make it work." And they did make it work, with adjustable rate mortgages that started with impossibly low payments, then exploded after 2 years. With stated income loans, nicknamed liar loans, where borrowers could claim any salary without proof. With ninja loans, no income, no job, no assets. The American dream repackaged as a financial weapon. But here's the dark genius of the scheme. The mortgage brokers didn't care if people could repay these loans. They weren't holding the risk. They collected their commission, often 5 to 6% of the loan value, and immediately sold the mortgage to a larger bank. The bank then bundled thousands of these toxic mortgages together, sliced them into pieces, and sold them as mortgage-backed securities to investors around the world. Pension funds, retirement accounts, foreign governments. Everyone wanted a piece of the American housing market, and the banks were more than happy to sell them poison, labeled as medicine. At Lehman Brothers, CEO Richard Fuld, known as the Gorilla for his aggressive management style, was pushing his traders to package more mortgages, faster. Lehman's profits were soaring. Between 2003 and 2007, the firm's revenue increased by 150%. Fuld personally took home over $400 million in compensation during those years. But beneath the champagne celebrations and record bonuses, something rotten was growing. Lehman was leveraging itself at ratios of 30 to 1. For every dollar the firm actually owned, It was borrowing 30 more to gamble on mortgages. It was a house of cards built on quicksand, and Fooled knew it. But the most sinister part of this business thriller wasn't just the bad loans. It was the ratings. Every mortgage-backed security needed a rating, a grade that told investors how risky it was. That job belonged to 3 companies: Moody's, Standard and Poor's, and Fitch. These rating agencies were supposed to be the watchdogs of the financial system, the guardians of truth in a market built on trust. Instead, they became accomplices to the greatest fraud in history. Here's the secret the banks don't want you to know. The rating agencies were paid by the very banks whose products they were rating. It was a conflict of interest so blatant, so corrupt, that it could only exist in shadows. If Moody's gave a bank's mortgage securities a low rating, the bank would simply take its business to S&P. Competition among the rating agencies meant competition to hand out the highest grades to the worst products. Securities filled with ninja loans, mortgages that had zero chance of being repaid, were stamped with AAA ratings, the same grade given to U.S. Treasury bonds. The agencies knew these ratings were fraudulent. Internal emails later revealed analysts joking about rating deals structured by cows. But the fees were too lucrative to stop. Moody's profit margins reached 50%, higher than ExxonMobil, higher than Microsoft. Truth became a commodity they could no longer afford. By 2006, the machinery was running at full speed. Over $600 billion in subprime mortgages were being issued every year. Housing prices were climbing 20% annually in some markets. Financial television personalities declared that real estate only goes up. But in quiet offices scattered across Wall Street, a few traders were starting to see the truth. They were looking at the data, the real data, and what they found terrified them. Default rates on subprime mortgages were beginning to tick upward. Homeowners who'd been lured in with teaser rates were reaching their adjustment period, and their monthly payments were doubling, tripling. They couldn't pay, and when they couldn't pay, they lost their homes. And here's where the story takes its first truly dark turn. A revelation so shocking, it exposes the entire conspiracy. While selling these toxic mortgage securities to unsuspecting investors around the world, telling them these were safe AAA-rated investments, the big banks were secretly betting against their own products. Goldman Sachs, the most prestigious name on Wall Street, was packaging mortgage securities with one hand and buying insurance against those same securities with the other. They knew the mortgages were garbage. They knew millions of Americans would default. They knew the whole system would collapse. And they were betting billions that it would. This wasn't just financial crime. This was premeditated economic murder on a global scale. The weapon they used was called a credit default swap, essentially insurance on mortgage securities. If the securities failed, whoever owned the credit default swap collected a massive payout. Goldman Sachs spent over $2 billion buying these swaps, while simultaneously selling the underlying securities to clients they called Muppets in internal emails. It was the financial equivalent of selling someone a car, has faulty brakes, then taking out a life insurance policy on them before they drive away. And Goldman wasn't alone. J.P. Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank, even Lehman Brothers, they were all making the same bet, setting up the same con. But someone had to sell all those credit default swaps to be on the other side of those bets. That someone was AIG, American International Group, one of the largest insurance companies in the world. In a small office in London, a unit called AIG Financial Products was selling billions of dollars in credit default swaps. They believed the housing market was invincible. They believed the AAA ratings. They believed the lie. By 2007, AIG had insured over $500 billion in mortgage securities. They had no idea they'd just guaranteed their own extinction. Spring 2007. The first cracks appear. A hedge fund called New Century Financial one of the largest subprime mortgage lenders, files for bankruptcy. It's a tremor, barely noticed by the mainstream media. But on Wall Street, analysts are starting to sweat. Bear Stearns, the fifth largest investment bank in America, runs 2 hedge funds heavily invested in subprime mortgages. By June, those funds have lost 90% of their value. By July, they're gone completely. Over $1 billion evaporated in weeks. But Bear Stearns' leadership, CEO James Kane, who spent his time playing bridge tournaments and smoking marijuana, according to later reports, assures the public everything is fine. Our liquidity position has never been stronger, they announce. It's a lie told in desperation. Behind closed doors, Bear Stearns is drowning. The firm holds $46 billion in toxic mortgage securities that nobody wants to buy. The market for these securities has frozen. It's like holding $46 billion in radioactive waste and trying to find a buyer. March 2008. Bear Stearns collapses. 85 years of history gone in 4 days. The Federal Reserve orchestrates an emergency sale to J.P. Morgan Chase for $2 per share. A year earlier, Bear's stock traded at $170. Thousands of employees lose their life savings. But James Kane walks away with $61 million in stock sales, made just before the collapse. The executives always have a parachute. The workers always hit the ground. The Bear Stearns collapse should have been a warning. It should have triggered immediate government intervention, regulation, oversight. Instead, Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs, assures Congress that the crisis is contained. The worst is behind us, he says. It's March 2008. He has no idea that in 6 months, the entire financial system will be hours away from total collapse. Summer 2008. Across America, foreclosure signs multiply like cancer cells. Entire neighborhoods in Florida, California, Nevada, Arizona, once thriving communities, sit empty, windows dark, lawns dead. Over 2 million homes enter foreclosure that year. Families who believed in the American dream are living in cars, in shelters, in the homes of relatives who haven't lost everything yet. But the real horror is still building, because those millions of defaulted mortgages are packed inside those mortgage-backed securities. And those securities are sitting on the balance sheets of every major financial institution in the world. July 2008. IndyMac Bank fails, the largest bank failure in American history at that point. Depositors lose billions. Images broadcast across news channels show customers lined up outside branches, desperate to withdraw their money before it disappears. The panic is beginning to spread. September 7, 2008. The U.S. government seizes Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, 2 government-sponsored enterprises that guarantee nearly half of all mortgages in America. Their debt, over $5 trillion. Taxpayers are now on the hook for losses they didn't create, for profits they never shared. September 10, 2008. Lehman Brothers announces a quarterly loss of $4 billion. The firm's stock plunges 45% in a single day. Behind the scenes, CEO Richard Fould is desperately calling every bank, every sovereign wealth fund, anyone who might save his empire. But nobody wants to touch Lehman. The firm holds over $600 billion in assets, most of it toxic mortgage debt. It's the Titanic after it hit the iceberg, and everyone can see it's going down. September 12th to 14th, 2008. A weekend that would change the world. Treasury Secretary Paulson and Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke summon every major Wall Street CEO to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The meeting happens in secret, behind locked doors, with phone lines secured. Paulson delivers the message. Lehman Brothers is dying, and if it goes down, it takes everyone with it. Find a buyer, or face financial apocalypse. But here's the secret that haunts this story to this day. Paulson had a choice. The Federal Reserve had the power to save Lehman, just like they'd saved Bear Stearns. But they chose not to. Why? Some say it was to send a message about moral hazard, that banks couldn't expect endless bailouts. Others whisper darker theories that Paulson, former Goldman Sachs CEO, was protecting his old firm by eliminating a competitor. We may never know the truth, but the decision made that weekend would trigger the worst economic collapse since the Great Depression. Monday, September 15th, 2008, 1:45 a.m. Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. $600 billion in assets, 25,000 employees, 158 years of history. Gone. Employees walk out of the headquarters carrying boxes, their faces captured by news cameras broadcasting the scene globally. Some are crying. Most are in shock. Their pensions, their savings, their stock options. Everything they'd worked for has just been deleted from existence. But the Lehman bankruptcy is just the first domino. That same day, Merrill Lynch, drowning in its own toxic mortgage securities, is forced into an emergency sale to Bank of America. The next day, AIG announces it's on the verge of collapse. Remember those credit default swaps Goldman Sachs and others bought? AIG owes billions on those bets, and they don't have the money to pay. If AIG goes down, every bank that bought insurance from them, essentially every major financial institution in the world, will suffer catastrophic losses. The entire global financial system is connected by invisible threads of debt, and all those threads are about to snap at once. September 16th, 2008. The Reserve Primary Fund, a money market fund considered one of the safest investments in the world, breaks the buck. Its share value drops below $1 for the first time in history. It held over $700 million in Lehman Brothers debt. Now that debt is worthless. Panic spreads through the money market industry. Within 48 hours, investors yank over $140 billion out of money market funds. The system that allows companies to make payroll, that allows businesses to operate day to day, it's seizing up. That evening, Paulson and Bernanke make an emergency visit to Congress. What they say in that classified meeting terrifies even the most hardened politicians. According to later testimony, Bernanke tells them, "If we don't act immediately, we won't have an economy by Monday. Not a recession, not a depression, no economy at all. ATMs would stop working. Credit cards would be declined. Stores wouldn't be able to stock shelves. The entire machinery of modern civilization runs on credit, on trust, on the belief that money has value. And that belief was hours away from dying." The government moves with unprecedented speed. AIG receives an $85 billion bailout, later increased to over $180 billion. The taxpayers now own America's largest insurance company. But the bleeding doesn't stop. Washington Mutual fails, the largest bank failure in history. Wachovia is forced into an emergency merger. Iceland's entire banking system collapses, taking down the country's economy. Ireland, Spain, Greece. The crisis spreads across Europe like a virus. September 29th, 2008. Congress votes on the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, a $700 billion bailout of Wall Street. The first vote fails. The Dow Jones plunges 778 points, the largest single-day point drop in history at that time. Over $1 trillion in market value evaporates in hours. Retirement accounts, college savings, investment portfolios, fortunes built over decades vanish, while people watch helplessly on their screens. 4 days later, after closed-door negotiations and political pressure that bordered on coercion, Congress passes the bailout. $700 billion of taxpayer money flows to the very banks that caused the crisis. But here's the cruelest secret in this entire dark business story. While banks received unlimited bailouts, homeowners received almost nothing. Programs to help families keep their homes were underfunded. Bureaucratic nightmares that helped less than 20% of eligible homeowners. Banks foreclosed on families, sold their homes at auction, and then received taxpayer money to cover their losses. The same families who lost their homes were forced through their taxes to bail out the banks that took them. By the end of 2008, the numbers are staggering. 8 million Americans lost their jobs. Unemployment would eventually reach 10%. Over 4 million homes entered foreclosure. The stock market lost over $7 trillion in value. Americans' retirement accounts were cut in half. The crisis destroyed over $19 trillion in household wealth. Entire communities were gutted, families torn apart, dreams shattered. But the executives, the architects of this financial crime, they walked away with their fortunes intact. Richard Fuld sold over $500 million in Lehman stock in the years before the collapse. Angelo Mazzillo, CEO of Countrywide Financial, one of the most predatory subprime lenders, sold over $400 million in stock, while his company was packaging fraudulent loans. He paid $67 million in civil penalties, but kept the rest. No jail time. No criminal charges. Lloyd Blankfein, CEO of Goldman Sachs, received a $68 million bonus in 2007, the same year his firm was secretly betting against the securities it sold to clients. Here's what the banks don't want you to know. Only one major Wall Street executive went to prison for the 2008 financial crisis. One. His name was Karim Sarageldin, a mid-level trader at Credit Suisse. He served 30 months. Meanwhile, the CEOs, the board members, the executives who knowingly sold fraudulent securities, who lied to investors, who destroyed the global economy, they faced no criminal prosecution. The Department of Justice deemed them too big to jail. The official story is that the banks made mistakes, that nobody could have predicted the crisis, that it was a perfect storm of unforeseeable circumstances. That's the lie they need you to believe. The truth is documented in emails, internal memos, whistleblower testimony, and government investigations. They knew. They knew the mortgages were fraudulent. They knew the ratings were fake. They knew the system would collapse. And they did it anyway because the profits were too massive to resist. In 2010, a special Senate investigation led by Senator Carl Levin uncovered internal Goldman Sachs emails where executives called their own products junk and crap while marketing them to clients as safe investments. One email from a Goldman executive read, "We're going to focus on a few key dates when bad stuff happened to the firms and explain how they caused it themselves." Another internal presentation described mortgage securities as designed to fail. The Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission concluded that the crisis was caused by widespread failures in financial regulation, dramatic breakdowns in corporate governance, and reckless risk-taking by Wall Street. In clearer language, deliberate fraud. But here's the darkest lesson from this business thriller. The system learned nothing. The banks that were too big to fail in 2008 are even bigger today. The four largest banks in America control over 40% of all deposits, more concentration than before the crisis. The same derivatives, the same complex financial instruments that triggered the collapse, are still being traded, just with slightly different names. And the government that bailed out Wall Street with $700 billion, it collected about $21 billion in fines from the banks responsible. That's 3%. Imagine robbing a bank and having to return 3 cents on every dollar you stole. That's justice in the world of wealth and power. The victims of this corporate scandal never recovered. That woman in Nevada who received the foreclosure notice. She's one of millions who lost everything, while the men who destroyed their lives drank champagne in boardrooms. The janitor who believed he could own a home. His credit destroyed, his family broken, His American dream revealed as a calculated lie sold by men in suits who never intended to keep the promise. The 2008 financial crisis wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't an act of God or an unforeseeable economic event. It was a crime, a heist executed in boardrooms and trading floors, where the weapons weren't guns but spreadsheets, where the getaway cars were golden parachutes, and where the only law that mattered was the law of greed. The banks want you to forget. They want the complexity of credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations to confuse you, to make you think you couldn't possibly understand their world of high finance. But the truth is simple. They lied, they cheated, they stole, and they were rewarded for it. They gambled with your money, lost, and made you pay for their losses. They sold poison disguised as medicine and called it innovation. They destroyed millions of lives and called it business. And the most terrifying part, they're still doing it. The same banks, the same executives, the same system that brought the world to its knees in 2008 is still running, still gambling, still hiding secrets in fine print and complexity. The machinery of greed never stops. It just finds new victims. So the next time you see a banker in a suit smiling from the pages of a business magazine, talking about market efficiency and shareholder value, remember what happened in 2008. Remember that behind every fortune is a shadow, behind every empire is a secret, and behind every crisis is a crime that someone profited from. This is the dark side of business, where the American dream is just another product to be packaged, sold, and ultimately destroyed for profit, and nobody goes to jail. That letter the woman in Nevada received, the one that took her home, the bank that sent it had already been bailed out with taxpayer money. Her money. She paid to have her own dream destroyed. That's the secret they don't want you to know. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.